would be great. That means
All right.
we have 6.
Right, Rabbi saying.
Here
we go.
Nice to see you, my friend.
Tonight we're going to be learning Eruvin. Eruvin? Eruvin.
Okay.
Start again.
It's been a very long day. We're learning Eruvin Daf Lamed Beis. We're actually not going to be learning all of Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph, just the first few lines, because that blot is particularly short, and so is the next Amud, and it's all one sugya up until that next Mishnah. So the breaking point actually worked out nicely, and for timing as well, and made my day a little easier. So win-win-win. So we're on the bottom of Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis at the Mishnah, about 15 lines from the bottom. This Mishnah, as we've been discussing so far, we were really discussing what can be used as an Eruv and what place is an okay place for an Eruv. And now we're going to touch the world of Shlichus. That's going to be most of tonight's discussion up until the next Mishnah. So what happened to Chereshot v'Katan? It's going to be always one of the classical examples of how we interact with Shlichus. Hashalech Eruvo biad Chereshot v'Katan o biad mi she'eno modeh be'eruv eno eruv. Let's say that I ask a child, one of my kids who's under the age of Bar Chiyuva, please go take this Eruv and bring it to a place where I can use it as an Eruv Tchum. So then says the Gemara, says the Mishnah that that's not allowed. If I did use those people, but there was a recipient on the other end, let's say I'm sending it to my brother. So they have to walk down Chase and up Sacramento to Sherwin. They're little kids, but they know how to walk and they know how to hand things to my brother. So maybe that should be mutter. There says the Gemara Taka it is, says the Mishnah, Hareze Eru. Says the Gemara, opening up a quick question, the katan lo. What do you mean that a katan is not allowed to do that? The Amar Rapuna katan govesa Eru. When there is an Eruv Chatzeros, so then we do allow for a katan to do that. That's what Rashi points out here. Rashi, the first one on the Gemara, Goves Eruv, Mibnei Chatzer, Ume'arev Aleim. He just walks around, everybody give their food into the basket, and the kid collects it. So it says the Gemara, Lo kasha kan be'eruv etchumen kan be'eruv chatzeros. It depends on what we're talking about. In one case, it's mutter, and in one case, it's not. What's the lamdusha difference between eruv etchumen and eruv chatzeros? Tosfos here highlights because eruv etchumen is an asmachtan based on psukim, and that has much more chashivas than an Eruv Chatzeros. And Rashi here kind of sort of says the same, the other side of that coin. Rashi Dibra Maskal Eruv Chatzeros writes, "De Aruve Rishusahu be'almahi hilkach memela me'arev. Afagav dein ma'ase katan klum lo ichpaslan." Rashi is basically highlighting that, okay, he's collecting the food, but like we don't really care what the food is. Like he's just kind of, it's going to happen with or without the kid. It's kind of like it's a memela. That's just going to happen. We don't really need him. And because we don't really need him, so therefore it's not problematic to lean on him. However, when it comes to Eruv Tchumen, that is not considered okay. There the Mefarshim use a language of kinyan by Tchumen, which is not something that a child can do. A child can't make kinyanim. And the famous shaila that Rabbi Robinson and Rabbi Friedman have always raised over the years is that on the first day of Sukkot, you cannot give a katan your lulav and esrog, because they can receive, but they cannot be makne. They can be kone, they can't be makne, in which case you are up a creek for fulfilling the mitzvah because we have a din of lachem. So therefore, if you don't own your lulav anymore, so what are you going to do? So that's not a good idea. So therefore, the Gemara makes a distinction. Our Mishnah is talking about a case of Eruvei Tchumen. Rav Huna was talking about a case of Eruvei Chatzeros. And that's why we have that distinction. And the Mishnah there said, last of the short lines, Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, the Mishnah said, O biyad mi she'eno modeh be'eruv. Who are we talking about? Man, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chizda Kusai. This is a person who is a kusi, and we've had different definitions in Shas for a kusi. Some say it's a goy, some say it's a Jew who is not makabel all of our Masorah and the way that we have our Masorah. And under those circumstances, this person is just not reliable in regards. He just won't drop it off because he thinks you're being ridiculous. Oh, you want me to put an egg and a matzah in the box? Yeah, okay, just drop that in the garbage. He's not reliable because there's no namanis for him to do that which he needs to do. First of the longest lines. So we said that, okay, you can use a chereshot of a katan as long as you're giving it to someone who's reliable on the other side. Why? It says the Gemara, maybe the Eruv will never get to the recipient on the other end because of the chereshot of a katan. Says the Gemara, elsewhere, you'll see what elsewhere means, but elsewhere, Rav Chizda was of the opinion that where I can see the recipient, I'm like watching the kid cross the street and he hands it to someone. I'm watching the whole thing happen. It's omid bero'ehu, hachanami be'omid bero'ehu. Here too, I can see it happening. Maybe the recipient on the other side of the street won't take it, can't take it, didn't take it, whatever the logistics are. Answers the Gemara, no, it's Kida Amar Rav Yechiel, Chazaka, Shliach Ose Shlichuso. in a separate case scenario, we have an assumption that a shliach will do his shlichus. Hachanami here too, chazaka shliach oseh shlichus. Now this answer is very difficult because the shliach that we're talking about is a katan. Now we've allowed it because all he has to do is move the food from point A to point B. But now you're putting in a language of that a shliach is oseh shlichus. He's a kid. He's a shota. He's a Karesh. They have no das. They're not reliable at all. So it's a questionable answer. But now let's see the actual Mar Mekomo. Says the Gemara, "Vehecha itmar de Reb Chizda Rabbi Chiel." These lines that we just saw above of Omid Veroehu and Shliach Oseh Shlichuso. Where is the context of where they said those lines? So it says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom. Aha itmar de Tanya. The Brisa writes, "Nasno lepil beholicho lekof beholicho ein ze eruv." If you put the eruv on top of an elephant, or if you give it to a monkey, so then ein ze'eruv, that doesn't work. Chereshat of katan is an equivalent, right? So that they're not b'nei das, they're worse than b'nei das. Im amar la'achar lekablo himenu harei ze'eruv. However, if the monkey's walking somewhere, let's say they're walking in a straight line, and you're on the other end of the straight line, so I'm sending it to you on the back of the elephant, in the hands of the monkey, whatever it is. So says the Gemara, that is considered an Eruv. And there we had the question, the Dimalo Mamtile, maybe it won't get to him. Amar Rav Chizda be'omid veroehu. There, that's where Rav Chizda said be'omid veroehu, that we brought back to our case, to our Mishnah. It didn't happen in our Mishnah. The statement of Rav Chizda did not happen by us. It happened elsewhere in regards to the kofin, in regards to the peel. So that's where his statement came in. But Dimalo Makabel Lemine, maybe the person on the other end won't receive it. Amar Rabbi Chiel, this is where Rabbi Chiel's comment comes in. Chazaka, shliach, oseh shlichuso, even if it's a monkey. That's really wild. Why are we assuming that a monkey is going to fulfill shlichus? It's very strange. Okay, not for now. So it says the Gemara as follows. On the bottom, very bottom line of Lamed Aleph on the base, this is a major shas sugya and important to know. This will take us all the way to the bottom of the next page and then so. Says the Gemara, a statement from two Amoraim in regards to this idea of shliach oseh shlichuso. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, B'shel Torah, when it comes to dinei deoraisa, ein chazaka shliach oseh shlichuso. When it comes to dinei deoraisa, we do not assume that a shliach will get his shlichus done. Let's say, l'dugma, that a person has to a get, right? So do we say automatically that the get got there? We say no, that because it's a din deoraisa, we would say, says Rav Nachman, that ein chazaka, that shliach oseh shlichuso. However, says Rav Nachman, turning to the top of Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, b'shel sofrim, when it comes to dinei derabanan, so then shliach oseh shlichuso, then we do rely upon the fact that a person will get the shlichus done. So the dogma, let's say, for example, our case, that you have to do Eruv Tchumen. So Eruv Tchumen is a din derabanan. So there we say that we rely. That's what we rely on. That's our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is Eruv Tchumen. Most Rishonim hold that, not most, some Rishonim hold that that Eruv Tchumen is a din derabanan. And because it's a din derabanan, so then we rely on the lenient side. That's the top line of Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. B'shel sofrim chazaka shliach oseh shlichuso. So Rav Nachman makes a distinction between deraisa and derabanan. However, Rav Sheshes Amar, Rav Sheshes was of the opinion, echad zeh ve'echad zeh chazaka shliach oseh shlichuso. Rav Sheshes was of the opinion that no matter what, even by dinei deoraisa, we assume we have a chazaka that shliach oseh shlichuso. Okay, big machlokes and shas, very powerful idea, a very big idea as to whether or not we rely on shlichus. Now the Gemara is going to try with 3 different versions to try explain the shita of Rav Sheshes. Remember, the shita of Rav Sheshes is no distinction. We assume that shliach oseh shlichuso, whether or not it is a din deoraisa or a din derabbanan. So try number 1 is on line 3, Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. Rav Sheshes mimno aminula. How do we know? How do I know, says Rav Sheshes, that chazaka, that shliach oseh shlichuso applies whether or not it's a din deraisa or din derabbanan? Very simple. Ditnan, the Mishnah writes, Mishakarav ha'omer hutar ha'chadash miyad. We know that the distinction between chadash and yashan is the hakravas ha'omer. So great. So once the hakravas ha'omer takes place, then all of the wheat is now considered to be yashan. So the isra of chadash falls away. You can eat it right away. However, b'harachokim, what if you live far away and you don't know when the korban is being brought on that day? So says the Mishnah, mutar michatzos hayom ve'elech. Half a day, you're done. By the time you hit chatzos, you can eat it. Says the Gemara, the chadash deoraisahu. You don't know that it happened. The bezdin's functioning as a shliach for you, and that's a din deoraisa. Mehechatesi, that you can eat the chadash at chatzos based on the assumption that So what do we see from here? The katani archokim mutar mechatzos yom ve'elech lav mishum chazaka shliach oseh shlichuso. Isn't this a slam dunk argument? We see here that we have a halachic assumption that you're allowed to eat the chadash now yashan from chatzos hayom, afal pi that you don't know. So you're relying on shlichus at that point. You're relying on Bezdin to do their job for you. The Rav Nachman, how does Rav Nachman respond to this? Because remember, Rav Nachman said that by Dinei Doraisa we do not rely on this chazaka. So it says the Gemara, Hasam kidigatani taima lefishiyoden shein Bezdin mis aslan bo. It's different. It's different by Bezdin. Bezdin's not going to get lazy. They're going to do their job. So if it needs to be done by chatzos hayom, and it does, then it will be done by chatzos hayom, and we don't have to worry about it. So therefore, that is the rejection, effectively, of the first approach of Rav Sheshes. But before we get to approach number 2, we have the inverse of this. Some say that this dialogue took place in a different way. Amar Rav Nachman, Rav Nachman was saying, how do I know that what I'm saying is true? That what? That by Dinei Doraisa that we don't have the chazaka of shliach oseh shlichuso. Because there we said by the Hakravas HaOmer that the Bezdin was not misatzel. Here's the deal. Bezdin who dilo misatzel bo, hashliach misatzel bo. So now he's got to prove to his own side. The only reason why we rely on Bezdin as it relates to the Hakravas HaOmer is because they're Bezdin. But a regular shliach, that's not Bezdin. No way, that doesn't work at all. So therefore, what would Rav Sheshes say to that? Rav Sheshes, Amar Lach, Bezdin ad palge diyoma. The korban has to be brought by the halfway. They're not there the whole day. So what does that even mean? You can't rely on them if they're not there the whole day. Shliach kula yoma. But when you're a shliach, you're not allowed to go to sleep till you do your work. You got a job to do. Your shlichus is not over yet. So that's how Rav Sheshes would undo Rav Nachman's approach. All of this was within approach number 1 about the Mishnah of Mishakar of Omer, about the Korban Omer that would be Matir Chadash and turn it into Yashan. Approach number 2, a quarter of the way down on Lamed Beis and Aleph, as to how we know about Rav Sheshes' Shita. Again, Rav Sheshes was of the opinion that both Dinei D'Oraisa and Dinei D'Rabbanan would rely on the Chazaka that a Shliach is Oseh Shlichuso. Amar Rav Sheshes min Aminallah. How do I know that Dinei D'Oraisa work, that we have such a Chazaka? It says the Gemara D'Tanya. The Brisa writes, Haisha sheyesh aleha leda o ziva, a woman who has this status of tuma of leda or ziva. So mevia mos v'nosenes b'shofar. She takes the money for her korban and she puts it inside of the container. A shofar was often used as a container, right? It had a wider top and a narrower bottom, a great way to hold things. So she would put the money into the container for her korban to be brought as a zava or as a leda, 2 months leda. And what do we see? We see v'toveles v'ocheles b'kachim le'erev. Then she goes to the mikvah and she can eat kachim at night. Why can she eat kachim at night? We don't even know if her korban was brought yet. All we know is that the money was put there. So what do we see from here? My taima. Lav mishum d'amrin chazaka shliach oseh shlichuso. Isn't this a perfect example? What do we see from here? The money was put in the shofar. We don't yet know if it's brought. She goes to the mikvah. The sun sets. She eats kachim. Did anybody send you a message that the korban was brought? No. How do we know that the korban was brought? Must be that we have a chazaka. And this is a raya for Rav Sheshes, that we don't make a distinction between Dinei D'Oraisa and Dinei D'Rabbanan. We always hold chazaka that shliach oseh shlichuso. What does Rav Nachman say about that? Almost halfway down. Rav Nachman, hasam kid Rav Shami. No, in that case, it's like the shita of Rav Shami, Dam Rav Shami, chazaka ein bezdin shel kohanim omdim misham ad sheyichlu kol ma'os shebeshofar. He says, no, terrible argument. There we have a specific assumption about those kohanim, that those kohanim are not going to let up. They're not going to let up until all of the money in that shofar has been spent. And when they see, however the money was wrapped up to say, this is your korban, until all the money was brought, then they would not stop working. They would make sure the shofar was empty. That's how they knew before Tzeis HaKochavim. That's how they knew that once Tzeis HaKochavim hit, that she could eat kachim. So therefore, approach number 2 of Rav Sheshes is gone. Let's try number 3. Amar Rav Sheshes min aminallah. What's my mari makom? The Tanya, the Brisa writes. Ha'omer lechaver. Let's say I ask a friend. Say ulakate lach te'enim miteinasi. You're going to go gather some dates from the date field. Go take some. I don't give you an amount. I just say, go take food. So the halacha is ochel mehen arai ume'asron vadai. You can eat arai, and you still should absolutely be me'aser vadai. You still will have, in other words, no one would have brought meiser yet on this food because there was no shear. We wouldn't know how much meiser to give. So if I'm the owner and I ask you, hey, do you want to go take some food? And you go take, I can't give meiser on what you're taking. I don't know what meiser is because you don't know how much you took. If you took 10 pounds, I only have to give 1. If you took 15 pounds, I have to give 1. I don't know what you're taking. So pashut, I'm not going to give meiser yet. So when you come back to my house, I still need to give meiser vada. However, if I give a specific amount, I give you a basket that holds a volume of X. So then under those circumstances, yes, you can be ochel mehen arai still. However, ume'asrin demai. But I'm not, you shouldn't be sure that I didn't take meiser because I'm a frum guy and I know how big the basket is. So the Gemara says there as follows: Bamed dvarim amurim. When is this true? Be'am haaretz. This is only true when the person we're talking about doesn't know enough about halacha. Aval b'chaver. When we're talking about someone who's a chaver who knows halacha well, ochel ve'eno tzarich la'aser divrei Rabbi. We know for sure he was already ma'aser. He's for sure he's a chaver. He was definitely going to be ma'aser. And this is a sheet of Rabbi. Rabbi's father was Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel omer bamed dvarim amurim, the opposite. Bamed dvarim amurim ba'am haaretz aval b'chaver eino ochel ad sheyaser. According to Rabbi, we assume that the meiser was taken immediately. And according to Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, we assume that the meiser was not taken immediately. Because we assume that a chaver will never take meiser from another source. In other words, if you're coming back from the field with 10 pounds of te'enim, you should not assume that I gave my meiser from a different collection of 1 pound of te'enim. That's shalom min hamukaf. We assume that a chaver always gives from this collection. You have this collection, I'm going to take off 1/10 and I'm going to do my donations. So that's what it's called shalom min hamukaf. That's the shita of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi says, Nirin devari midivrei Abba. I agree with my shita more than I agree with the shita of my father. Why? Because it says, Mutav sheyachshadu chaverim litrom shalom min hamukaf lo yachilu la'amei haaretz tvalim. I'd rather be in a case scenario where someone would give meiser shalom min hamukaf, which is not ideal, but that's much better than someone eating mamish tevel, which is nisr d'oraisa. We don't mess around with that. So that's why Rabbi likes his shita more, that we assume that the meiser had taken place first, even if shalom min hamukaf, instead of the shita of his father, Shimon ben Gamliel, who says that no, if you're a chaver, you should not take meiser shalom min hamukaf. That would not be right. So then says the Gemara, the actual punchline. To this proof of Rav Sheshes. Remember, we're still in the proof of Rav Sheshes of how do we know that we say that both by Dinei D'Oraisa and by Dinei D'Rabbanan that there's a chazaka that a shliach is oseh shlichusa. So it says the Gemara as follows. We're 2/3 of the way down. Ad kan lo pligi ela demar savar nechshadu umar savar lo nechshadu. Right now, it seems to be that they're just concerned. The machlokes is only where they are concerned about to be Torah min hamukaf. Aval kule alma. However, everyone does agree, says the Gemara, that chazaka shliach oseh shlichusa. No matter who you hold like, it seems in both cases that the shliach always does their shlichus, that someone's going to be giving meiser. So that's the proof for Rav Sheshes that we see from this brisa that we follow the chazaka of shliach oseh shlichuso in regards to the case of the te'enim from the te'enasi. Says the Gemara, how does Rav Nachman answer that? Rav Nachman, hasam kid Rav Chanina Choza. What does Rav Chanina Choza say? Amar Rav Chanina Choza, chazaka hu al chaver she'eno motzi davar she'eno musuka mitachas yado. There it's different. There, the reason why we assume that the chaver did the meiser is because the chaver has an assumption about him that he would never let something out of his hands that isn't musukan. He would never let something out of it, not because of Rebbe's concern of shalom min hamukaf, not because of anything else. A chaver is machbid gamor. He would never allow for any tevel to leave his hands. He's always going to make sure. It's not because of shlichus. It's because of a side din about being a chaver. And therefore, says Rav Nachman to Rav Sheshes, your argument is not a good one. The Gemara now quotes back to a part of the brisa, and we're going to analyze it. Amar Mar, 8-9 lines from the bottom of Lamed Beis Mud Aleph, says the Gemara, Amar Mar, Bamed Dvarim Amurim, we said, what was the case that we're talking about with the case of the dates? We said, Be'am ha'aretz. Aval b'chaver ochel ve'eno tzarech la'aser divrei Rabbi. We said in the name of Rabbi that he doesn't have to do the meiser right now. I asks the Gemara, Hi am ha'aretz de ka'amar le'leman. Who's talking to who here? Who's the am ha'aretz? Who are we talking about? So if one am ha'aretz is talking to another am ha'aretz, this whole conversation is dead in the water. Because me'aser and demai mitzayis, is he going to listen to him? One am ha'aretz is talking to another. It's the blind leading the blind. Nobody cares about the dinim of meiser. They're not makbid on halacha. So of course it can't be a case of an am ha'aretz talking to an am ha'aretz. Ella, says the Gemara, be'am ha'aretz to ka'amar le'lechaver. You must be talking about a chaver, because a chaver is the only one who's going to care about giving meiser. That's where Rabbi and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel got into their discussion. That can't be that he's talking to a chaver, because Ema Seifa, what did we see in the end of that brisa? At the end of that brisa, we saw the following quote: Nirin devarai mi divrei Abba. I agree with my shita, says Rabbi, more than my father's shita, more than that of Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Why did Rebbe hold that way? Because he was of the opinion of mutav sheyachshedu chaverim litrom shalomina mukav. He was more concerned about the fact that a chaver, he would prefer the error of being torem shalomina mukav than he would for aval yachidu la'amei haaretz tavalim. So that has to be the case, which means by definition, who are we talking? Who's the receiving end there? It can't be the chaver, like we said before. It has to be an Ahama Aretz. Amei Haaretz, my by Hasam. Obviously, it has to be talking about him. So Amar Ravina, what must be the case? Reisha, in the beginning part of the Brisa, where Rebbe and his father are arguing, that's Be'am Haaretz. That's Be'am Haaretz, She Amar Lechaver, Seifa Bechaver She Amar Le'am Haaretz. So we see here that there's a distinction. However, there's a caveat in the Seifa, Bechaver Acher Shom'o. So in the last case of the Brisa, where Rebbe says, I trust my opinion more than my father's opinion, when Rebbe says that, there's another chaver who's listening on to the conversation, almost someone who's like keeping things in check. And Rashi here at the bottom details all of this. Now let's continue to see the heart of their machlokas. Rebbe, turning to the top of Lamed Beis Mud Beis, Rebbe Savar, Oso chaver ochel, ve'eno tzarech la'aser, devadai isure ma'aser, hahu chaver kami ilaveh. Says Rebbe in that seifa, that chaver ochel ve'eno tzarech la'aser, he can eat and he doesn't have to give meiser. Devada yisur ma'aser hu chaver kama ilaveh. The second guy who was watching the Am Haaretz, the second chaver, so he would for sure make sure that meiser was taken. The Reb Shimon ben Gamliel omer lo yochal ad she'ya'aser. You should not eat anything until a meiser was taken. That is going to be Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's shita, is that he's afraid that a chaver may end up being torem shalom min hamukaf, that you brought in the food over here, but I didn't give meiser from the food you brought in, I brought it from elsewhere. So then says the Gemara 5 lines down, Va'amar lei Rebbe says to that, mutav sheyachshedu chaverim litrom shalom min hamukaf al yachilu amei haaretz tvalim. So he says back to his father, again, this is in the Seifa now, not in the Reisha, but it is a repetitive conversation. There, Rebbe says back, he says to his father, respectfully, this is shilas in halacha, how can you argue with your father? These are good shilas. But anyways, the Gemara here says that in the Seifa, in this case where you have the chaver who's speaking to an Am Haaretz, but another chaver is watching, which was the ukimta of the Seifa, so there, says the Gemara, the Rebbe is concerned, I'd much rather have a chaver be term shalom min hamukaf than having an Am Haaretz eat tevel. So says the Gemara, but my can be flagay. What's at the root? What is at the root of the machlokas between Rebbe and Reb Shimon ben Gamliel? Says the Gemara, 6-7 lines down, Rebbe savar nichalei lechaver dele aved hahu isura kilila. I'd rather have it be, Rebbe says, that the chaver should do a small isur of being torem shalom min hamukav v'lo le'aved am haaretz isura rabba. I'd much rather the chaver do this small error than have an am haaretz do a major error. For Reb Shimon ben Gamliel savar nichalei lechaver dele aved am haaretz isura rabba ve'ihu afilu sura klila lo le'aved. And Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, it's not your responsibility to watch over for every other person's error. This is not your problem, and it's unfortunate that he's going to do this avera the way that it is. He's going to do the avera the way that it is. I was telling David about a shaila yesterday about this family that put me in a very compromising situation. They said, we want to use this form of birth control, or we're going to break halacha. You can't do that. You can't do that. That's your problem. That's not the posek's problem. You don't dump that on the posek's lap. That's not right. I didn't answer the shaila. I gave it to someone. But anyways, my point is that's what Rishon ben Gamliel is saying. That's your problem. You're an Am Haaretz. I have to be a frum guy. I'm not breaking halacha because of you. That's not my problem. So that's where the machlokas hinged upon in regards to Rebbe, who wanted to prevent the Isser Rabbah of an Am Haaretz eating tevel, in order to, and therefore that meant by definition that the chaver would be tarm shalom min hamukaf. Rabbi was better with that than having the reverse, where the fruma yid would be violated an isser kal. Okay, that's the machlokas between the two of them. That brings us to the next mishnah. The next mishnah is a mishnah in the Lamed Beis and Beis, about 11 lines down, and the mishnah starts as follows. This is back to a location discussion about Eruvin. Nasnu be'ilan. If you take your Eruvin, you put it in a tree, it's above 10 tvachim, the halacha is ein eruvo eruv. No dice, that does not work. If it's less than 10, so then the halacha is eruvo eruv, you're good to go. No problem at all. And very interestingly, nasno bebor, if you put your Eruv in a pit, afilu amok mea ama, Even if it's 100 amos deep, that's a very big hole. That's 150 feet down. That's not the kind of thing you want to fall into. So then what does the Mishnah say? Eruvo eruv. That's fascinating. So we're gonna get into all of this. And Rashi here highlights Mefarish Bigmara. He understands that there's questions. Got it. Clear. Good questions. All of the instinctive questions you have on the Mishnah are probably right. So it says the Gemara as follows. Yasi Rabbi Chia. I lost my spot. Here we go. Yasi Rabbi Chia bar Abba v'Rab Asi v'Rava bar Nasan. So these three Rabbanim were sitting. V'Yasi Rav Nachman gabayhu v'Yasve v'Kamri. Rav Nachman was sitting with them and they were talking. Hi Ilan dekoi hecha. Where is the tree that this Mishnah is talking about? This is such a great example of how the Amoraim interfaced with a Mishnah. They had the Mishnayos all organized per Rabbi Yehuda ben Nasi, and then here's what happened. They gave shir on the Mishnayos. So they were sitting down talking and learning. What's pshat in the Mishnah? So that's where the Amoraim come in the layering of the Gemara, in the Revadim of the Gemara, and the layering. This layer one is Mishnah, and the next layer is going to be what was their lens. So this is what bothered them. They were just sitting down schmoozing, like, all right, I saw the Mishnah in the book. Somebody give me a pshat. Where was this tree? Says the Gemara as follows: if the tree is in my backyard and private property, so then I don't understand. Mali lamala, mali lamata. Who cares where it is? It's Rishus Hayachid. Rishus Hayachid ola ad l'rakia. Rishus Hayachid never goes away. So what do you mean it's above 10 tefachim? I understand in Rishus Harabim, okay, that's Malkum Patur land, a whole bunch of things I could make up. But this doesn't make any sense. I'm in Rishus Hayachid. Ad. Of course it should work, because it's Ola the Rakia.
Well, you don't need a Eruvin in a Rishus Hayachid.
No, but it may be that your house is in a space outside of the city. Your house is in a space where the Eruv allows you to extend your Eruv further.
Oh, okay.
Right? So that's, that would just be, we'll see later that that's a new kimta here as well. It's a good question. It says the Gemara that if this is in a Rishus Hayachid, then that doesn't work. So we're almost halfway down Lamed Beis and Beis. Ve'ala dekai b'Rishus Harabim. What must we be talking about? We're talking about where the tree is in Rishus Harabim. Diniskavein, period. Good. So then says the Gemara, wait a minute. Diniskavein lishbos hecha. Where were you making your shvisa here? If you were intending to have shvisa up above the tree, and that's where your eruv was, so then you're living in a tree house, everyone should be thinking right now trees are muksa. We're going to discuss that because that should be popping off the page, because how are you sitting in a tree house on Shabbos? But if you're in the tree house and your eruv is in the tree house, where were you kona shvisa? If it's above 10 tefachim, you're good to go. There's nothing wrong with that. Ella must be niskaven lishvos lamata, and your eruv is above. Wait a minute. We learned already that there's a formal isser derabanan to touch a tree. Muksa is not even different than muksa. It's usually moving things. My daughter on Shabbos said, "Isn't it true that I can touch an iPhone on Shabbos?" I'm like, it's a very complicated question. Like, is the screen on? Like, the isser of muksa is about moving things, but not by a tree. Ishtamshus be'ilan is totally not allowed. So says the Gemara, La'olam, what must be going on here? You're right. La'olam dekoi birshus harabim. Really, the tree is birshus harabim. V'niskaven lishbos lemata. And really, you wanted to be kona shvisa on the ground, underneath 10 tvachim. V'Rebbi. And Rabbi was of the opinion, to Amar kol davar shubishum shvus lo gazra alav ben hashmashos. Yes, it's true that your tree was where the eruv was put, and hishtamshus be'ilan in general was usher. But ben hashmashos, there's no gzera derabana. And therefore, technically speaking, during ben hashmashos, it's accessible to be able to get to that eruv, and therefore it is permissible. Amar lehu Rav Nachman Yaisher. That was a beautiful pshat. Rav Nachman said to them, you guys got it. You guys got it all correct. V'chein Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said the same thing. So Rav Nachman was quoting Shmuel. Okay, so Amruleh, they said to him, Pasrisu Bakule Hai. He came up with this whole ukimta that must be Rishus Harabim, but it must be below the tree, and it's Rebbe, that there's no Gzeira by Hishtamshus of the tree. He came up with all of these details. That says the Gemara back, I don't understand. Inhu Nami Hachi Kapasri. They came up with it. Inhu Nami Hachi Kapasri. The three rabbis I'm sitting with, you all just figured it out. What, you think Shmuel is a slacker? First of all, he's 2 generations before you. Let's show a little respect. And second of all, he's Shmuel. He doesn't need your help. Of course he figured it out. Says Gemara, no, you misunderstood my question. No, I wasn't questioning Shmuel. Elahachi amrule. Kaba isu le b'Gemara. Do you have a specific tradition that this is pshat? Not that you have the lumdas to come up with an answer. Is this really the Masorah that you have about this Mishnah, Rebbe? Amar lahu in. Yes, that is exactly correct. And here is the text proof to support it. It's Nami, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Now Rav Nachman is specifically quoting Shmuel, right? This is a beautiful flow of Gemara. We have our Mishnah, we have our question from the Amoraim clarifying the Ukimta. We come up with one in learning. Rav Nachman says you're not the first one to say that. My Rebbe said it. Really? You have a tradition? Yes, let me quote it for you. It Nami, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Hacha be'ilan omid b'rshus harabba maskinan, gavo asara v'rochav arba. It's its own entity, v'niskaven lishpos lamata, and I'm sitting under the tree. That's where I want to be. The Rebbe he da Amar kol davar shu mishum shvus gazer alav bein hashmashos. Beautiful, nice, clean, tight Gemara that explains to us how this Mishnah is working. Says the Gemara, though, we have to add some more qualifications. Amar Rava. Rava says, we're about 9 lines from the bottom of the page, Lamed Beis Med Beis. Amar Rava, Rava says as follows. Lo shanu, ela be'ilan ha'omed chutz le'ibura shel ir. This was to Michael's question before. What are we talking about? We're talking about a tree that protrudes from the city. So let's say, for example, that my arms are all the houses, right? So all these houses are tightly knit in a perfect circle. Right outside the city is another house within 70 2/3 amos. So this is bi'ibura shel, looks like a pregnancy, it's an ibur. So this is bi'ibura shel ir. That's the house that we're talking about. That's what Rava says. Lo shanu ela bi'ilan ha'omed chutz li'ibura shel ir. It's outside of the city itself. Aval ilan ha'omed besoch ibura shel ir. Afilu lemala me'asara hareza eruv. Had it been that it was besoch ibura shel ir, so then even if it was above 10 tfachim, it would be considered an eruv. Why would anything above 10 tefachim be considered an eruv? So says the Gemara, big Karesh, demata kiman demalya damya. When it's within the ibura shel ir, it's within the city limits. It's all part of the actual city. So then we treat it as though it's all filled up, like a solid place, like a reshus hayachid. So it's ibura shel ir. We treat the above the tree part as this is a chiddush by a Hilchos Tchumen, that we treat something that, and this is quoted by halacha as well, that be'ibura shel ir, it's considered demata kiman demalya damya. So says the Gemara, ihachi, if that's true, if what you're saying is that because it's included in the city, so therefore we treat it all like a reshus hayachid, then I don't understand. All cases of kinyan shvis is like a reshus hayachid. Ihachi, if that's true, chutz libura shel ir nami, even in the middle of the desert, even if I put it above a tree, kevan da'amar rabba hanosen eruva yesh lo arba amos. If everyone gets 4 amos when they're kona shvisa, when they pick a spot for their eruv, then havya l'reshus hayachid. Reshus hayachid olad harakia. I don't understand. You're trying to tell me that when there's this little bubble in your city, and that's where the house is, and we're within the ibura shel ir, there you say it's demata kiman demalia. It's like it's all one space. Fine, but Rava taught us a din that wherever we're kona shvisa, we get daled amos. But then that's my daled amos, and it's a reshus hayachid. And if it's a reshus hayachid, then even above 10 tvachim should work as reshus hayachid. Reshus hayachid is ole ad rakia. So the Gemara is very bothered by this idea. Of course, everyone should have their own reshus hayachid. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yitzchak b'Reder of Misharshia. What are we talking about? Another ukimta. What must our Mishnah be talking about? By the way, this is in addition to all the other ukimtas. So we know it's in Reshus Harabim. We know that it's Lamata Me'asara. We know that we're using a tree according to Rebbe's parameters, that it's that we're not gozer bein hashmashos. And now we're saying that it is bi'ibura shel ir. And here's another part of the ukimta. Amar Rav Yitzchak b'Reder of Misharshia. Hacha be'ilan hanote chutz la'arba amos askinan. The tree under which you took shvisa, you were kona Shabbos, the branch goes outside of your daled amos. This like ukimta never stops. It's a constantly evolving additional line after line after line to our Mishnah. If we wrote our Mishnah, it would have 5 more lines in it right now. That's what we're talking about. Top of Ablam Gimel Amid Aleph, V'niskaven lishvos be'ikaro, and you want it to be close to the tree. So where's your eruv? It's away from you. It's above 10 tfachim. I reshus hayachid according to Rava. Yeah, in theory, but the branch is wider than the daled amos, and therefore it's no longer going to work according even to Rava. Says the Gemara, if you have a branch that's going straight out, what is the reference of umay lemala, umay lemata? If the branch is at a perfect height, what does it mean above and below? So answers the Gemara, the hadar zaki, if the branch actually curves, the branch is actually going horizontally and it curves and gets higher and it changes in its shape. So that's another layer of the ukimta. But in theory, I could violate Isuri Derabanan and go climb up the tree and get it. I can go up by the leaves. Says the Gemara, no, you can't. The Havamin of that, by the way, is to go up in the tree is a Carmelis, and then to come back down should only be an Isser Darabanan. That was a Havamina, because you're allowed to violate Isser Darabanan during Bein Hashmashos to get your Eruv. So maybe we can go from Rishus HaYachid up in the tree to get my Eruv and come back down to Rishus HaYachid. Because to go from Rishus HaYachid to a Carmelis carrying is an Isser Darabanan. So it should be a great solution. Says the Gemara, you can't say this. This branch was Kshirabin Mikatfin Alav. We learned about this idea earlier. This is the type of branch that when people were walking, it was like the branch that was perfectly placed to adjust your package against it on Shabbos, whatever you were carrying, or not on Shabbos, but even during the week, it would be permissible to do that. So it says the Gemara, Uchedu'ula de Amar Ula, Amu Tisha v'Rishus HaRabim v'Rabim Mekatfen Alav v'Tzarech Menach al Gabo Chayev. That's considered to be part of a Rishus HaRabim, and therefore you can't climb the tree to get it. Therefore, we're going to be stuck now, because if you go up in the tree, you can't come down with the Eruv, because now you're going from Rishus HaRabim to Rishus HaYachid, because that branch is Rabim Mekatfen Alav. Sikum Hadvarim is that our Mishnah that we learned on the top third of Lamed Beis and Lamed Beis of this case of an Elon has like 6 different ukimtas, one layered right after the other. We know that it's in Rishus HaRabim. We know that you were Kona Shvisa Lamatami Gimel. We know that we're relying upon Rabbi, that you are allowed to violate Isurei Derabanan. There's no Gzeira of Isurei Derabanan during Bein Hashmashos, which is why you can get your Eruv. We know we're talking about a tree whose branches extend outside your Dalet Amos, and that's where your Eruv is. And we know that it's a branch that it's Rabbi Mekatfen Alav, because otherwise, theoretically, you could have climbed up and gotten it yourself. It's an unbelievable layer after layer after layer of the Mishnah. And we're actually going to stop right here. And on Shabbos, we'll do Lamed Gimel, because it's just 2 shorter Amudim, and Lamed Dalet Amud Aleph as well as a shorter Amud. And in Yirtzeh Hashem, we will get to the Mishnah on the bottom of Lamed Dalet Amud Beis on Shabbos afternoon. I don't know what time it is.
5:35.
5:35. All right, I'll see you then.
5:35.
It's getting earlier. Just wait till the clock